The crystal chandelier in their Greenwich penthouse cast a perfect fractured light over Reagan's face, a portrait of the flawless life Andrew had built for them. But as she leaned into a midnight text, the glow of her phone revealed a reflection in her eyes, a name that didn't belong to their world. Behind every ivory tower in this city lies a foundation of glass, and once it shatters, the silence is deafening. If you feel the weight of secrets hidden behind closed doors, stay with me. There are many more layers to uncover in the shadows of this house, and you won't want to be left behind when the truth finally strikes. The rain in Manhattan didn't fall. It drifted a gray mist that clung to the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Brooks penthouse like a shroud. Inside, the air smelled of expensive sandalwood and the sharp metallic tang of chilled Sancerre. Andrew Brooks sat in his leather armchair, the blueprints for the Midtown Pavilion spread across his lap, but his eyes were fixed on the reflection in the dark glass. Behind him, Reagan was getting ready for the Vanguard Foundation Gala. She was a vision in emerald silk, her back arched as she struggled with the clasp of a diamond necklace, a gift Andrew had given her for their 5th anniversary. Or perhaps it was their 4th. The years were starting to bleed together into a singular polished blur of social obligations. "Drew, honey, could you?" she asked, her voice like velvet. Andrew stood his movements methodical. As he reached out to fasten the clasp, his fingers brushed the nape of her neck. She didn't flinch, but she didn't lean in either. There was a newfound stasis in her body, a subtle guarding of her borders. "You're working late again," she murmured, glancing at the blueprints through the mirror. "The right firm is lucky to have you. But Derek says you're overstressing the structural joints on the Plaza project. He thinks it's unnecessary cost." Andrew's hands paused. Derek Stone. The name was a frequent guest in their home, lately always framed as professional advice or market insight. "Derek is a developer, Reagan. He counts pennies. I'm an architect. I count lives," Andrew said softly. He finished the clasp and stepped back. Reagan turned, giving him a practiced, radiant smile, the kind she used for donors and board members. Then her phone buzzed on the vanity. It was a short, sharp vibration that seemed to echo in the quiet room. She didn't pick it up immediately. That was the first mistake. Usually, Reagan Scott lived and breathed through her device. This hesitation, this 3-second delay where her eyes flickered toward the screen and then back to him, was a crack in the foundation. "Just work," she said, finally picking it up. "The PR cycle never sleeps." She walked into the walk-in closet to grab her clutch, leaving the phone face down. In the silence of the bedroom, Andrew felt a cold, crystalline clarity wash over him. He wasn't a man of impulse. He was a man of logic, of load-bearing walls and stress tests. He walked to the vanity. The phone buzzed again. A preview of the message appeared on the lock screen. "D. Stone. The signatures are ready for the transfer. He has no idea. See you in 20. Andrew didn't feel his heart break. He felt it harden into something industrial. He looked at the emerald silk dress through the closet door, at the woman he had built his world around. She wasn't just having an affair. She was liquidating him. She was the crack in the beam that would bring the whole house down. He stepped back to his chair and sat down, picking up his drafting pen. When Reagan emerged glowing and perfect, he looked up and smiled, a perfect imitation of the man she thought she had already erased. "Have a wonderful night, Reagan," he said. "I'll be right here when you get back." "Don't stay up too late, Drew." She blew him a kiss, the scent of her perfume lingering like an unspoken lie as the elevator doors chimed and closed. Andrew waited until the sound of the elevator faded completely. Then he stood up, walked to his laptop, and opened a blank encrypted file. He didn't cry. He began to draft a new blueprint, one where he didn't exist in her world anymore. The restaurant was the Gilded Oak, a place where the lighting was dimmed specifically to hide the age of the men and the intentions of the women. Andrew sat across from Reagan. His suit jacket buttoned his posture as rigid as a skyscraper's spine. To his left sat Derek Stone, a man who wore success like a weapon, his smile a little too wide, his handshake a little too firm. "I'm telling you, Andrew, the future isn't in stone and mortar," Derek said, swirling a glass of deep crimson Cabernet. "It's in the data. If we can shave 5% off the material costs of the plaza, the investors will crown us kings of the Hudson." Andrew watched Derek's hand. It was resting on the table inches away from Reagan's silk-clad arm. He noticed the way Reagan leaned in, not enough to be scandalous, but just enough to signal alignment. It was a dance of shadows choreographed in the light of flickering candles. Architecture isn't just about profit margins, Derek. Andrew replied, his voice calm, devoid of the tremor that threatened to erupt from his chest. If the integrity of the structure is compromised for a quarterly report, the building becomes a tomb. I'm sure Reagan understands that. She spent years building her reputation on solid ground. Reagan laughed, a light, melodic sound that felt like glass shards in Andrew's ears. Darling, Andrew is such a romantic about his work. But Derek is right about the market. We have to be agile. The PR strategy for the plaza is already leaning into the efficiency narrative. Efficiency, Andrew repeated the word, tasting the bitterness. Is that what we're calling it now? Cutting out the parts that are deemed unnecessary. He caught Reagan's eye. For a split second, the practiced mask of the PR executive slipped. A flicker of uncertainty, perhaps even a shadow of guilt, crossed her face. But it was gone before the waiter could refill their water. She was good. She had been trained by the best to sell a lie until it became the truth. Throughout the three-course meal, Andrew observed the micro-expressions. The way Reagan's thumb stroked the stem of her wineglass when Derek mentioned the upcoming board meeting. The way Derek's eyes never truly left Reagan's neckline. They weren't just lovers. They were business partners in a heist where Andrew was the vault. He realized then that Reagan hadn't just stopped loving him. She had devalued him. In her mind, he was an outdated asset, a structural flaw in her climb to the apex of New York society. "You're very quiet tonight, Drew," Reagan whispered, as Derek stepped away to take a crucial business call. She reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. Her skin was warm, but to Andrew, it felt like the touch of a ghost. "Just thinking about the plaza." He lied, his smile perfectly calibrated. "About how everything has to fit perfectly for the whole thing to stay upright. One missing piece and it all comes down." "You worry too much," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hum. "Everything is under control, I promise." Andrew looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the stranger she had become. He felt the weight of the digital evidence sitting in a hidden folder on his cloud drive. He wasn't the missing piece. He was the architect. And he was about to redesign her reality until there was no room left for him in it. When Derek returned, smelling of expensive cigars and cold ambition, Andrew raised his glass. "To the plaza," he said, the light of the chandelier reflecting in his eyes like cold steel, "and to the secrets that keep it standing." Reagan and Derek clinked their glasses against his, their smiles bright and hollow, unaware that the man they were erasing had already begun to write them out of his life. The office of Monica Walsh was a stark contrast to the glass and steel cathedral of Wright architecture. Tucked away in a pre-war building in the Flatiron District, it smelled of old paper, burnt coffee, and the quiet hum of high-end servers. Monica herself was as sharp as a forensic scalpel, her eyes shielded by thick-rimmed glasses that seemed to scan Andrew's soul for any sign of weakness. "You're sure about this, Mr. Brooks?" Monica asked, leaning back in her chair. She didn't look like a savior. She looked like an undertaker for the wealthy. "Once I start moving these pieces, the trail becomes a labyrinth. You won't just be divorced, you will be a ghost. On paper, you'll have the net worth of a graduate student." "I've spent my life building things that are meant to last centuries, Monica," Andrew said, his voice echoing in the small room. "Now I want to build a void. I want them to reach for me and find nothing but air." Monica tapped a pen against a stack of bank statements. "I've been tracking Derek Stone for years. He's a predator who uses developers' debt to swallow their firms. But your wife, she's the one who opened the door. She's been signing off on your IP transfers as your authorized representative for months. She's not just leaving you, she's harvesting you." The words felt like a physical blow to Andrew's solar plexus, but he didn't let his expression flicker. He had spent the last 48 hours practicing his breathing, stabilizing his internal load-bearing walls. He watched as Monica pulled up a digital map of his accounts. With a few keystrokes, she began the process of strategic withdrawal. The plan was surgical. They wouldn't steal the money. They would reposition it into trusts and offshore entities that Reagan's PR-trained eyes would never find. Andrew was liquidating his soul one investment account at a time. He was selling his shares in the firm to a blind trust Monica controlled effectively, making himself an employee in a company he used to own. "It'll take 3 weeks to finalize the erasure," Monica said, her gaze softening just a fraction. "During that time, you have to be the perfect husband. If she suspects you found the leak, she'll freeze the joint accounts, and Derek's lawyers will bury you in litigation. I can play the part, Andrew said. It's not just about playing it, Drew. It's about the silence. She warned. She's going to lie to your face every morning. She's going to kiss you while planning your professional execution. Can you handle that without breaking? Andrew stood up, smoothing the front of his charcoal suit. He thought of the midnight text on Reagan's phone. He thought of the way she had looked at Derek across the table at the Gilded Oak with a hunger she hadn't shown Andrew in years. I'm an architect, Monica, he said coldly. I know exactly how much pressure a structure can take before it collapses. I'm not the one who's going to break. He left the office and walked into the biting New York wind. He took the subway instead of a car service, a small deliberate act of disappearing into the crowd. When he arrived back at the penthouse, Reagan was in the kitchen pouring 2 glasses of wine. She looked radiant, the picture of domestic bliss in a cashmere lounge set. You're late, honey, she said, handing him a glass. I missed you today. Andrew took the glass, his fingers careful not to touch hers. He looked into her eyes and saw the woman who was systematically erasing him from his own legacy. He took a sip of the wine. It tasted like ash. I was at the site. He lied, his voice a perfect replica of his usual tired, devoted tone. The foundations are deeper than I thought. It's going to take a lot of work to make sure everything stays in place. Reagan smiled and leaned her head on his shoulder. Andrew stared at the city lights through the window, calculating the exact moment he would let go. The atmosphere at Wright Architecture was thick with the scent of ozone and panic. By 10 a.m., the internal servers had been flagged with a high-level security breach. Andrew stood in the center of the drafting room, watching the IT team scramble. He looked every bit the distressed partner, his sleeves rolled up, his hair slightly disheveled. In reality, he had triggered the leak himself, a controlled release of outdated, flawed schematics for the Plaza project. It was a baited hook. The leaked files were designed to look like trade secrets, and he had made sure the trail pointed vaguely toward a mid-level staffer. Andrew, my phone is blowing up, Reagan said as she strode into his office, her heels clicking like a countdown on the hardwood floor. She looked panicked, but her eyes were darting toward his computer screen with a predatory sharpness. The press is hearing whispers of a security compromise. If this hits the Wall Street Journal, the investors will pull out of the Stone-Wright merger. Andrew sank into his chair, rubbing his temples. I don't know how it happened, Reagan. Someone accessed the secure vault. If these designs are public, the structural integrity of the project will be questioned. I need you to handle the PR. We need to frame this as a technical glitch, not a theft. Protect the firm's name, protect my name. Reagan stayed silent for a moment too long. She walked to the window, looking out at the Manhattan skyline where the crane for the plaza stood like a skeletal giant. Drew, if we call it a glitch, it makes the firm look incompetent. But if we admit it was a targeted leak, we have to name a culprit. Then find one, Andrew said, watching her reflection. Help me save what I've built. Reagan's phone buzzed in her hand, a flurry of messages. Andrew knew who they were from. Derek would be frantic, fearing that his involvement in the intellectual property theft was about to be unmasked. I have an idea, Reagan said, her voice turning cold and professional, the voice she used when she was about to bury a scandal. Derek's team can issue a statement saying they found the discrepancies first. It makes him look like the hero, the diligent developer. It keeps the project's valuation high. And what about me? Andrew asked, his voice a low, dangerous whisper. It makes my firm look like we were the ones who made the mistake. It shifts the blame to my architects. To me. Reagan turned around, her expression one of faux sympathy. She stepped closer, placing a hand on his chest right over his heart. It's just business, honey. Once the merger is complete, no one will care about a minor technical leak. But Derek's reputation is fragile right now. He needs this win to secure the funding. You're established. You can take the hit. Andrew looked down at her hand. The wedding ring he had chosen for her, a custom-cut emerald, glinted in the office light. She wasn't just asking him to take a hit. She was asking him to commit professional suicide to protect her lover's wallet. You're right, Andrew said, his voice devoid of emotion. It's just business. I knew you'd understand, she breathed, leaning up to kiss his cheek. Her lips were cold. I'll go call Derek and coordinate the press release. We'll fix this. As she hurried out of the office, Andrew pulled up his terminal. He watched as Reagan's private IP address accessed the firm's server from her phone just minutes later, sending the hero data to Derek Stone. The test was over. Reagan hadn't just failed, she had burned the bridge while he was still standing on it. Andrew picked up his desk phone and dialed Monica Walsh's private line. "It's time," he said, staring at the empty doorway where his wife had just stood. She chose him. Burn it all down. Start the erasure. The silence in the penthouse was no longer peaceful. It was a pressurized chamber. Reagan had ordered omakase from a place in Tribeca, and the delicate slices of fish sat between them like offerings to a god who had already left the room. She was celebrating. The leak had been handled exactly as she planned, with Derek Stone appearing in the Financial Times as the visionary who saved the integrity of the Midtown Plaza. "To us," Reagan said, raising a glass of sake. The light caught the sharp angle of her cheekbones, a beauty Andrew had once thought was timeless. "We're going to be the most powerful couple in the city after the merger, Drew. Just think of the doors that will open." Andrew looked at her, and for a fleeting second, he saw the girl she had been in New Haven, the one who drank cheap coffee and talked about changing the world through sustainable design. He looked for a trace of her in the woman sitting across from him, but all he saw was a polished, predatory stranger. "I was thinking about our first apartment in Brooklyn," Andrew said softly. "The one with the radiator that clanked all night. We didn't have a view of the Chrysler building back then. We just had each other." Reagan paused, her glass halfway to her lips. A shadow of something annoyance or perhaps a brief, stinging memory flickered in her eyes. "We were children, Drew. We've grown up. She gestured to the sprawling, glass-walled luxury around them, "is what growing up looks like. Success requires sacrifices. It requires leaving the sentimentality behind." "Sacrifice," Andrew repeated. He felt the phantom weight of the blueprints. He had spent thousands of hours perfecting the ones she had effectively handed to Derek for a fraction of their worth. "I suppose you're right. I'm learning a lot about what can be sacrificed lately." He realized then that he had ignored the red flags for years. The way she always checked her phone when he walked into a room. The way she had gradually replaced his friends with strategic contacts. The way she had stopped asking about his designs and started asking about his equity. He had been an architect building a home on a fault line, convinced that if he just reinforced the walls enough, the earth wouldn't move. After dinner, Reagan went to the terrace to take a call. Andrew stood in the doorway of his study, watching her silhouette against the city lights. He could see her laughing, her body leaning into the phone in a way she never did with him anymore. He knew it was Derek. He knew they were likely discussing the final stages of the buyout that would strip Andrew of his chairmanship at Right Architecture. He turned away and opened his safe. Inside was a small velvet box containing a watch his father had given him. He placed it in his pocket along with a flash drive Monica had sent over an hour ago. He was no longer mourning the marriage. He was auditing it. Every kiss she gave him now felt like a transaction. Every "I love you" was a line of code meant to keep the system running until the hackers were finished. Andrew sat at his desk and began the final liquidation of their joint household inventory. He wasn't just moving money anymore. He was moving memories. He was systematically uncoupling his identity from the Brooks Scott brand. When Reagan came back inside, her cheeks flushed from the cold air. In the excitement of her secret life, she found him sitting in the dark. "Is something wrong, Drew?" she asked, her voice tinged with a faint, sharp edge of suspicion. "No," Andrew said, standing up. He walked past her, his shoulder barely brushing hers, and for the first time he felt absolutely nothing. "I'm just realizing that some structures aren't worth the cost of the renovation. It's better to just let them fall." He went to the guest room and closed the door. In the morning, he would be a ghost. The glow of the dual monitors in Monica's darkened office illuminated the jagged lines of a digital crime scene. Monica didn't speak. She simply pointed at the screen, where a series of outgoing encrypted packets were highlighted in red. The timestamp on the most recent transfer was 2:14 a.m. on a Tuesday, a night Andrew remembered vividly because Reagan had claimed she was staying up late to finish a press kit for a charity gala. "It's not just the plaza schematics, Andrew," Monica said, her voice dropping to a low clinical tone. "She's been harvesting your entire archive, design patents, proprietary structural algorithms, even the private client list for the firm's next decade of projected growth. She's been BCCing everything to a private server owned by Stone Development Group. Andrew leaned in his eyes, tracking the file names. Project Icarus, the Glass Spire, the Seaboard Initiative. These weren't just buildings, they were his intellectual DNA. Reagan hadn't just been unfaithful in their bed, she had been strip mining his brain. She's setting up a consulting firm under a shell company. Monica continued clicking through another layer of data. The paperwork is already filed in Delaware. The day the merger goes through and you're pushed out, Stone Development will hire her firm for a staggering retainer. It's a kickback, a reward for delivering right architecture to Derek Stone on a silver platter. Andrew felt a strange humming vibration in his limbs. It wasn't the heat of anger, it was the sub-zero chill of absolute clarity. He watched a log of a private chat between Reagan and Derek that Monica had managed to intercept through a mirrored port. Reagan, he's completely blind to it. He actually thinks I'm trying to save his reputation. Derek, good. Keep him distracted with a loyalty talk. Once the board votes on Friday, his signature on the merger becomes his resignation. Reagan, I've earned my cut of this, Derek. Don't forget that. Andrew stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city that had once felt like his playground. Now it looked like a giant, complex machine designed to grind men like him into dust. He realized that Reagan didn't just want a life with Derek. She wanted Andrew's life, his prestige, his brilliance, his assets without the inconvenience of Andrew himself. Can you trace the offshore account where her retainer is being held? Andrew asked. I already have, Monica replied, a grim smile touching her lips. And I can do one better. I can redirect the authorization protocols. Since she used your domestic IP and your shared credentials to set some of this up, I can make it look like the funds were never successfully transferred, or better yet, that they were diverted by an internal error back into a trust she can't touch. No, Andrew said, his voice as hard as granite. Don't stop the transfer. Let the money go where they want it to go. I want them to feel secure. I want them to think they've won. If they think they have already succeeded, they'll stop looking for me in the shadows. He turned back to Monica. How long until I can officially disappear from the firm's liability insurance and the joint tax filings? 72 hours, Monica said. By the time the board meeting starts on Friday, you will be a legal ghost. You'll own nothing, and your name will be scrubbed from every document that could tie you to the inevitable fallout. Good, Andrew said. He checked his watch. It was nearly time for dinner. He had to go home and play the part of the grateful husband one more time. He had to let her kiss him and tell him that everything would be okay, all while knowing she had already sold the very ground he was standing on. As he walked toward the door, he looked back at the screen, at the red lines of the paper trail. He wasn't just an architect anymore. He was a demolition expert, and he had just found the structural weakness in their plan. The gaslighting of Reagan Scott did not begin with a grand gesture, but with the absence of things. Andrew began to systematically remove the small, invisible threads that held their shared life together. One morning, the framed photo of their wedding at the plaza, the one Reagan used as a prop for Family Man PR shoots, was gone from the hallway. In its place was a slight rectangular shadow on the wallpaper where the sun had failed to reach. Drew, have you seen the wedding photo? The one from the hallway? Reagan asked, her voice echoing from the foyer. She was dressed for a power lunch with the board members, her emerald earrings catching the morning light. Andrew looked up from his tablet, his expression a mask of mild confusion. The hallway? We haven't had a photo there in months, Reagan. Don't you remember we moved it to the storage unit when we talked about redecorating? Reagan blinked her hand, pausing on the door handle. Redecorating, I don't. Maybe I just forgot. It was a small crack, a hairline fracture in her certainty. Later that afternoon, Andrew sent an automated email from his work account to Reagan's office, BCCing Derek. It was a drafted thank you note to a fictional lawyer discussing a discrete asset relocation that had been completed. 10 minutes later, he recalled the email, knowing Reagan's assistant would have already flagged it for her. When he returned home that evening, the air in the penthouse was vibrating with Reagan's nervous energy. She was pacing the terrace, her phone pressed to her ear. She didn't see him enter. I'm telling ya, Eric, the thing is off, she hissed into the receiver. He's acting vague. And there was an email today, something about a lawyer. If he's moved the money before the merger, we're screwed. Andrew stepped into the light. Reagan jumped, nearly dropping her phone. She ended the call abruptly, her face flushing. Drew, you startled me. You're home early. The firm felt empty today. Andrew said, his voice flat. He walked to the bar and poured a glass of scotch neat. I had a meeting with the insurance adjusters. They were asking about the Brooks-Scott joint liability policy. I told them to just cancel it. Reagan's glass of wine paused midair. Cancel it. Why would you do that without talking to me? I figured since the merger is moving everything to Stone Development's umbrella, our individual names don't matter anymore. Andrew said, looking her directly in the eye. Isn't that what you and Derek wanted for everything to be? Streamlined. Reagan's eyes searched his, looking for a sign of malice, a hint of the merciless man hiding beneath the surface. But Andrew gave her nothing but the hollow stare of a man who had already checked out. The psychological toll began to manifest in her work. At a high-profile industry mixer that night, Andrew stood at the periphery watching as Reagan's colleagues asked where he was going to spend his retirement after the buyout. Each time she tried to laugh it off, Andrew would offer a cryptic comment about traveling light or shedding old skin. By the time they returned home, Reagan was vibrating with unspent questions. She followed him into his study, her shadow long and distorted against the mahogany shelves. Are you okay, Drew? You're acting like you're already gone, she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and irritation. Andrew turned silhouetted by the moonlight. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, Reagan. In the foundation. You just don't notice the foundation until the walls start to lean. He went to bed, leaving her standing in the center of the room, surrounded by the expensive things she had stolen from him, feeling for the first time that she was holding on to a house made of smoke. The office was Derek Stone's personal sanctuary, a cavern of dark marble and polished chrome overlooking Bryant Park. Derek didn't sit behind his desk. He leaned against it, legs crossed, a man who had already declared victory before the battle was over. On the desk lay a thick stack of legal documents, the official buyout of Andrew's remaining shares and the transfer of his intellectual property to Stone Development. It's a generous offer, Andrew, more than fair considering the technical difficulties your firm has been having lately, Derek said, sliding a gold fountain pen across the marble. Andrew sat in the guest chair, his shoulders slightly slumped, his eyes fixed on the floor. He looked like a man who had spent the last week in a bottle. In reality, he had spent it with Monica, ensuring that every document Derek was about to sign contained a hidden kill switch legal clauses that tied Derek personally to any structural failures of the plaza. I didn't think it would end like this, Derek, Andrew said, his voice brittle and hollow. I built that firm from nothing. I thought I was building something for Reagan and me, something that would last. The world changes, Drew. Some people move with it, others get left in the blueprints, Derek replied, unable to mask the smug satisfaction in his voice. He looked at Andrew with the pity of a wolf looking at a wounded deer. Reagan is a visionary. She needs a partner who operates on her level. You're a great architect, but you're a dinosaur in this market. Andrew reached for the pen. His hand shook a deliberate, practiced tremor. He looked at the signature line. This was the moment he officially erased his professional existence. By signing this, he was no longer the chairman of Wright Architecture. He was a nobody. Does Reagan know about the specifics of this buyout? Andrew asked, pausing. She helped draft the terms, Derek said, his voice dropping to a confident purr. She knows what's best for both of you. Sign the papers, Drew. Take the money and go find a beach somewhere. You're done. Andrew pressed the pen to the paper. The ink flowed smoothly. Andrew J. Brooks. With those 3 words, he handed over the keys to his kingdom. Or so Derek thought. What Derek didn't know was that Andrew had revised the structural schematics for the plaza's main atrium one last time. He had replaced the reinforced steel specifications with a complex experimental alloy that looked identical on paper but carried a fatigue limit that would trigger a non-lethal but catastrophic visual failure under the heat of the gala's lighting system. It was an architectural ticking time bomb tied directly to the fraud evidence Monica was compiling. There, Andrew said, pushing the papers back. He stood up, avoiding Derek's triumphant gaze. It's yours, all of it. Good man, Derek said, slapping Andrew on the shoulder. The touch was condescending, a final brand of ownership. I'll have my people wire the first installment to your joint account with Reagan by morning. Keep it, Andrew said, already halfway to the door. Keep what? The money. Give it to Reagan. She's the one who cares about the price of things. Andrew said, not looking back. As he stepped into the elevator, the doors closing on Derek's confused expression, Andrew felt a surge of cold electric energy. He had played the victim perfectly. He had given them exactly what they wanted, his silence and his surrender. Now he was no longer a husband, a partner, or an architect. He was a ghost in the machine, and the countdown to the gala had officially begun. The move happened in the gray liminal hours of a Tuesday morning while Reagan was in Washington, D.C. for a pre-merger press junket. Andrew didn't hire a moving truck. He didn't pack boxes labeled with his name. He simply took what was his, which after Monica's careful auditing, amounted to a single leather suitcase and a portfolio of hand-drawn sketches that predated his marriage. He walked through the penthouse one last time. It was a masterpiece of interior design, every piece of furniture handpicked by Reagan to project an image of effortless power. But without his books on the shelves, without his drafting tools on the desk, the space felt like a high-end hotel suite, beautiful, expensive, and entirely devoid of soul. He left his wedding ring on the marble kitchen island. Beside it, he placed his key card and the fob to the Tesla. He didn't leave a note. A note was a bridge and explanation, a way for her to track his emotional state. Silence was a wall. His new residence was a studio in a converted industrial laundry in Long Island City. It was one room with exposed brick, a narrow bed, and a window that looked directly at the Manhattan skyline he had helped shape. It was a vantage point of an outsider, a ghost watching the living. "You're officially off the grid," Monica said, leaning against the doorframe of the studio later that evening. She handed him a burner phone and a new set of credentials. "The joint accounts are closed. The penthouse lease has been transferred solely into Reagan's name, along with the remaining debt. Your mail is being forwarded to a P.O. box in Delaware that doesn't exist." "And Reagan?" Andrew asked, staring at the distant glittering lights of the penthouse across the East River. "She called your office 12 times today," Monica replied, checking her tablet. "The firm told her you resigned effective immediately. She went to the penthouse an hour ago. My sources say she stayed inside for exactly 10 minutes before she started calling Derek in a panic." Andrew imagined Reagan standing in the silent kitchen, looking at the ring on the cold marble. He imagined her realizing that the man she had been trying to erase had simply beaten her to it. He hadn't fought for the furniture or the prestige. He had simply walked out of the frame, leaving her to deal with the debt and the mounting pressure of Derek's expectations. "She'll think I've broken," Andrew murmured. "She'll tell Derek I'm a coward who couldn't handle the loss." "Let her," Monica said. "The more she underestimates your absence, the less she'll prepare for your return. The gala is in 48 hours, Andrew. The structural sensors I installed in the plaza's atrium are already calibrated. When the heat of the gala lights hits that alloy, the visual failure will begin exactly when the fraud documents are leaked to the guests' mobile devices." Andrew sat on the edge of the bed. The room was cold, the air smelling of dust and New York rain. For the first time in a decade, he didn't have to be a husband, a partner, or a victim. He was a void, and a void was the only thing Reagan Scott couldn't manipulate. "I spent years making sure she had everything," Andrew said, his voice a low, steady hum. "Now I'm going to make sure she has exactly what she wanted. The life she built with Derek Stone. Every hollow, crumbling inch of it." He turned off the single light bulb hanging from the ceiling. In the darkness, the architect was gone. Only the ghost remained. The Stonewright Plaza was a cathedral of glass and arrogance. Tonight it was flooded with the creme de la creme of Manhattan city officials, real estate titans, and the predatory glitterati of the PR world. Reagan Scott stood at the center of the atrium, a vision in shimmering gold sequins that mimicked the champagne bubbling in 1,000 crystal flutes. Beside her, Derek Stone looked like a king who had finally secured his borders. "Tonight isn't just about a building," Derek's voice boomed through the high-fidelity sound system. "It's about a vision that Reagan and I shared when others lacked the fortitude to see it through." Reagan smiled, though the expression didn't quite reach her eyes. For the last 48 hours, she had lived in a state of vibrating anxiety. Andrew's disappearance had left a vacuum in her life that she couldn't explain. He hadn't called. He hadn't sued. He had simply vanished, leaving his ring on a counter like a piece of discarded trash. "To the future," Reagan added, raising her glass. The crowd cheered, the sound echoing off the experimental alloy beams Andrew had specified. High above the crowd, in the shadows of the mezzanine, Andrew Brooks watched. He wore a tuxedo he had bought with cash, his face obscured by the dim lighting. He wasn't looking at the champagne. He was looking at the digital tablet in his hand. Monica was in his ear via a tiny earpiece. "The thermal load is hitting the limit," Monica whispered. "The gala lights are running at 110%. The alloy is beginning to expand. 5 minutes until the visual stress fractures appear." "And the data burst?" Andrew asked, his voice low and steady. "Ready. Every VIP in this room is connected to the building's guest Wi-Fi. As soon as the first crack sounds, their phones will receive the dossier, the transfer logs, the diverted offshore funds, and the proof that Derek Stone knowingly used substandard materials to inflate his margins." Andrew stepped out of the shadows and began to descend the grand staircase. He didn't rush. He moved with the practiced grace of a man who knew exactly how the scene would end. Reagan was the first to see him. Her glass stopped halfway to her lips, her face draining of color until she looked like a marble statue. She nudged Derek, her hand trembling. "Derek," she hissed. "Look." Derek turned, his smug grin faltering. "Andrew, what the hell is he doing here, security?" But the security team was distracted. A sharp, crystalline crack echoed through the atrium, sounding like a gunshot. The crowd went silent, looking up. One of the massive decorative beams near the ceiling appeared to groan, a spider web of surface fractures blooming across its polished surface. It wasn't falling. Andrew was too good an architect to kill people, but it looked like it was about to. Panic, subtle at first, began to ripple through the room. Then simultaneously, 500 smartphones buzzed in unison. "Check your phones, Derek," Andrew said, his voice carrying through the sudden, terrified hush of the room as he reached the bottom of the stairs. He stood 10 feet away from his wife and her lover. "The structural integrity of this building is exactly like your partnership. It looks perfect on the surface, but the foundation is a lie." Reagan looked down at her phone, her eyes widened as she saw her own private messages to Derek, the ones about harvesting Andrew's IP, splashed across the screen in a high-resolution PDF titled "The Stonewright Fraud." "Drew, wait," Reagan gasped, taking a step toward him, her gold dress suddenly looking like a funeral shroud. "We can talk about this. This isn't you." "You're right, Reagan," Andrew said, looking at her with a terrifying calm pity. "The man you knew was a structure you built to house your ambition. I've finally moved out." Another crack splintered the air. The lights began to flicker. The elite of New York were no longer looking at the architects. They were staring at their screens, then at Derek, then at the exits. The erasure was over. The exposure had begun. The sound of the atrium breaking was the symphony Andrew had spent weeks composing. It wasn't a physical collapse, but a psychological one. The elite of Manhattan, usually composed, scrambled toward the exits as the spiderweb fractures on the alloy beams caught the glare of the flickering spotlights. The visual effect was terrifying, a deliberate architectural illusion of imminent disaster. Andrew, stop this!" Derek screamed, his face a mottled purple, as he clutched his phone, which was still vibrating with notifications of the leaked fraud dossier. "I'll sue you into the dirt. I'll have your license revoked." "My license is already gone." "Derek," Andrew said, his voice cutting through the panic with chilling precision. "I surrendered it when I signed your buyout. I'm just a private citizen pointing out a structural flaw in a public space. And as for the documents, those aren't from my firm. They're from yours. Internal servers don't lie as well as you do." Reagan stood frozen, her hand covering her mouth. She watched as her friends, the women she had lunched with at the Met, the editors who had promised her the next cover of Vogue, turned away from her, their faces twisted in disgust, or shielded by their phones as they live tweeted the scandal. The Brooks Scott brand was being incinerated in real time. "Drew, please," Reagan whispered, stepping over a fallen champagne flute. She reached out for his arm, her eyes welling with tears that might have moved him a month ago. "You're destroying everything. Our life, our history. You're in those files too. You'll be ruined along with us." Andrew looked at the hand on his sleeve. He felt a faint ghost of the love he once bore her, but it was like looking at a photograph of a dead relative. The connection was there, but the life was gone. "I'm already ruined, and Reagan," he said softly, leaning in so only she could hear him over the din of the retreating crowd. "I was ruined the night I saw Derek's name on your phone, Mo. I was ruined when I realized you didn't just stop loving me, you started selling me. I've lived in the ruins for weeks. I've grown quite comfortable in the dark. It's your turn now." He gently unhooked her fingers from his tuxedo. "The police in the SEC are likely 10 minutes away." Andrew continued checking his watch. "Monica Walsh is very thorough with her anonymous tips. I'd suggest you use this time to find a lawyer who doesn't mind a client with zero liquidity, because as of 5 minutes ago, the offshore accounts you thought were yours, they've been flagged as proceeds of a crime." Reagan's knees buckled. She sank onto the polished marble floor, her gold sequins clashing with the cold stone. She looked up at the atrium she had helped steal, now a theater of her greatest shame. Derek was already being cornered by two men in dark suits near the service entrance, federal agents who had been guests at the gala. Andrew didn't stay to watch the handcuffs. He didn't need the satisfaction of a shouting match. He turned his back on the woman who had erased him and walked toward the main doors. He stepped out into the cool, crisp New York night, the air tasting of rain and freedom. Behind him, the Stonewright Plaza stood, illuminated, a monument to a fraud that had finally been unmasked. For the first time in years, Andrew Brooks didn't have a plan, a blueprint, or a wife. He had nothing. And as he walked into the anonymity of the city, he realized that nothing was the strongest foundation he had ever stood on. 6 months later, the dust of the Stonewright scandal had settled into the thick files of the Southern District of New York. The penthouse had been seized and sold at auction, and the name Brooks Scott had become a cautionary tale in the annals of Manhattan's fall from grace. Derek Stone was awaiting sentencing in a federal facility, and Reagan, stripped of her firm and her social standing, had retreated to a small town in Connecticut, living in a quiet obscurity that was for her a fate worse than prison. Andrew Brooks sat on a wooden bench in a small park in Vermont, far from the serrated skyline of Manhattan. The air here smelled of pine and damp earth, not sandalwood and cold ambition. He was dressed in a simple flannel shirt and jeans, his hands the hands of a man who once designed empires, now calloused from working as a freelance consultant for a small sustainable housing cooperative. He pulled a small, weathered envelope from his pocket. It was a letter from Reagan forwarded through Monica's secure channel. He hadn't opened it for weeks. Now, under the honest light of a New England autumn, he finally broke the seal. Druitt began the handwriting, less confident than it used to be. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I finally understand that I didn't just lose the plaza or the firm. I lost the only person who saw me before I became what the city wanted me to be. I am living in a house with no mirrors. I hope you found the peace I was too greedy to keep." Andrew read the words twice. He felt a faint, distant pang of sadness, but no regret. He didn't feel the need to write back, nor did he feel the surge of triumph he had once imagined. The merciless part of his comeback hadn't been the destruction of her life. It had been his ability to walk away and never look back. He had erased himself so completely that the woman who knew him no longer had a ghost to haunt. Monica Walsh had called him the day before, offering him a partnership in a new forensic firm in London. "You have a gift for seeing the cracks before they happen. Andrew," she had said, "we could do a lot of good." He had told her he would think about it, but as he watched a young couple nearby arguing over the assembly of a park birdhouse, he realized he wasn't ready to go back to the world of secrets and stress tests. He liked the quiet. He liked the fact that when people here called him Andy, and they didn't know about the Brooks-Scott merger or the glass atrium that almost fell. He stood up and walked toward a trash bin, dropping Reagan's letter into it without a second thought. The wind caught a stray corner of the paper, swirling it away into the trees. Betrayal is a structural failure of the heart, he realized. You can't patch it and you can't ignore it. You have to tear the building down to the dirt and start over. He had spent years building monuments to his own success, only to find that the most resilient structure was a man who had nothing left to hide. Andrew walked toward his truck parked on a gravel path. He had a meeting with a local carpenter about a low-income housing project on the edge of town. It wasn't a landmark, and it wouldn't be featured in the Architectural Digest. It was just a house, a place where people would live, sleep, and tell the truth. He started the engine and drove toward the mountains. Behind him, the ghost of Andrew Brooks, the architect of Manhattan, stayed buried in the glass and steel of a city that had already forgotten his name. Ahead of him was the open road, a blank blueprint, and a horizon that finally felt like home.